Well, good morning again. Got a couple of pictures that I want to show you here as we get going. A couple of great things happened this past week. First one here. There you go. That's Hannah. Hannah's sitting up here. Hannah got baptized Thursday night. And then Friday evening, got another picture. Shamika, who is Adrian's younger sister, was baptized as well. So one thing you need to know is that what happened here this morning doesn't always have to happen here this morning, you know? Remember this, 925-286-2022. Okay, that's my cell number. You call me. It doesn't have to be Sunday morning, okay? If God has put this on your heart and you finally are ready, like, you know what, I got to do this. I need to do this. Amen. Let's do it, you know. Just call. Just call. You don't have to wait if you don't want to wait. All right? Awesome. Hey, we're going to start looking at a section that makes up the end of the book of Genesis. That's the first book in the Old Testament. So we are going Old Testament here for the next several weeks. And I want to start by just sort of asking a bunch of questions for all of us to reflect on that kind of sets the stage for this story. So what do you do if your mate decides that you're just not worth that much effort anymore? You bore them. They're tired of you. Maybe they even want to divorce you. What do you do then? Or maybe they don't leave you in the form of a formal divorce. They just sort of isolate themselves from you. They speak to you with a hint of contempt. What do you do if you're kind of their object of disdain? Or maybe you are the one who's bored. It's been 10 years, 20 years you've been in this, and you feel like you're stuck in something that you did not bargain for. How this turned out was not what we agreed upon. So what do you do? What do you do when your coworker gets recognized with a raise and with a promotion because they kind of know how to work people, work the angles. They know how to schmooze the boss. Or maybe it's because of nepotism. And you worked every bit as hard, you're every bit as well trained, every bit as well educated, you put in just as much time, but they were the ones who got rewarded. And what if in general just your office environment is just unjust, it's just unfair, it's toxic? What do you do when you're in a situation like that? What do you do when your culture minimizes you? Or maybe life seems to be going on just peachy keen for you, and then all of a sudden, bam, your legs get knocked out from under you in some way. Some sort of tragedy happens. You experience a loss. It could be a relationship. It could be your health. It could be a job. It could be a dream that you had. And you finally have to admit it's not going to happen. And where was God when this was going on? I mean, I thought he was supposed to have my back. What do I do now? Life has a way of throwing you a lot of, so we're starting baseball season here, a lot of brushback pitches. Soon to be called Houston Astros pitches, right? A lot of life just doesn't just throw it up there nice and easy for you all the time. What do you do if you grow up in a family where there's just chaos? Maybe you and your siblings are or have been mistreated. Or maybe you were just used as pawns in family power plays. Or maybe you were just ignored. And maybe it's not your parents, but it's the siblings that are against you. So what if you grow up in a family where deceit and scheming, they're just kind of the family legacy? And how about if you are treated like an outcast, maybe even at your school, it could be even with your family, you could have been betrayed, you could have been slandered. And don't you love it when somebody notices some flaw in you or some mistake that you have made and they just feel the need to share and share and share with anybody who has ears? How do you respond to that? And what do you do when you have the opportunity to balance the scales of justice to people who've treated you unjustly, or people who have treated you like a nuisance or like a bore? The story of Joseph has a lot to say to stuff like this. Why study Joseph? When Alice was pregnant for the first time, we didn't know if we were having a boy or a girl, and we go to these birthing classes, and of course the birthing classes always say things like, well, mom's intuition is what you should rely on. They know the best, right? And well, in our family, mom was saying it's a girl. And so I'd finally just kind of, okay, we're going to have a girl. And we kind of came up with the name. We were all agreed upon about this name. And comes time for delivery, and out comes this baby, and the name Caroline is not going to work. It is just not going to work. But there was no wondering for me about what the boy name was going to be, and Alice was nice enough to just let me have it. I had a grandpa that I really looked up to. Really, really good man. Hard worker. Had to have been the most kind, progressive coal miner you would ever find in Appalachia. Just a wonderful, wonderful man. And his name was Joseph. And I knew if I had a boy, I wanted to name him Joseph. And partly because of my grandfather, but also because of the guy that we're going to read about over the next several weeks. The guy that we read about at the end of Genesis here, man, he's an impressive guy. Even Pharaoh eventually notices this midway in the story of Joseph. And he says, Pharaoh's asking his advisors, and he says, can we find anyone like this man? One in whom is the Spirit of God. And that's a passage that ought to probably get our attention. We might be able to learn something from somebody who's described that way. Joseph faces a lot of challenges. He gets tons of those brushback pitches, tons of curveballs. Joseph gets a lot of bean balls in his life. He deals with being despised and betrayed. He's got bad family relations. He gets tempted sexually. He gets falsely accused. He's punished unjustly. He is forgotten and ignored. He spends enormous amounts of time isolated and alone. And like Joseph, we can find ourselves in situations where we feel mistreated and powerless. And we struggle with knowing what to do, and we struggle with knowing even if I can do anything that would make a difference. And we wind up with what? Lots of why questions, right? I had somebody yesterday asking me a lot of why questions. Life invites us to ask a lot of why questions. Why are these things happening? Why am I being treated this way? And my hunch is that Joseph asked a lot of why questions too. How could he not, given all the things that are going to happen to him? You read through his life. But it seems to me that the story is intent on us seeing that Joseph pushes past just the why questions, and the story wants us to think, and I like to imagine Joseph asking more questions like, what do I do now? We're going to see some themes as we go through this story, looking into his life here. And so just by way of remembering as we go through this, you're going to see these over and over, I think. And the first is this: God is working. It was about 1,700 years after Joseph, the Apostle Paul wrote a letter to the Christians in Rome who were undergoing some very tough circumstances in their own life. And one of the things that he says to them is this, and we know that in all things, right? God works for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose. So God is working things out for good, even if it doesn't always seem that apparent. And because of his immediate surroundings, Joseph had plenty of opportunities to believe otherwise, right? There are going to be plenty of days in Joseph's life that don't look like God working it out for good. Next week we're going to see the dreams that Joseph has at the very beginning of his story. And he's a teenager when he gets these dreams. And the Joseph story is about these beginning dreams that are sent from God to him, slowly working themselves out in his life. But if you looked at any particular snapshot of the in-between time for Joseph, between dreams given and dreams fulfilled, it doesn't look very dreamlike. There's nightmares in this thing, in that hyphen time, the in-between time. And you and I also, we live between some brackets there of promises given to us and promises realized. We're in the middle of a lot of those. And is there really an ending to the story like God says? And the story of Joseph says that God is working it out for good. And he often does it in seemingly hidden ways. My personal experience isn't one of God just kind of like popping out in the middle of nowhere and say, okay, I'm going to fix everything right now. Bam. Nothing but just straight, easy balls right down the middle of the plate for you the rest of your life. That doesn't happen to me. I don't think it happens to you. And it doesn't seem to happen that way for Joseph. But the story is about God ultimately accomplishing his purposes in spite of the tough pitches that Joseph gets all throughout his life. And we see Joseph in faith living as somebody who believes that God is working it out. God is working it out for good in spite of some of the things that you and I see going on around us. And Joseph's story invites us to also live as people who believe that God is working it out for good. Another theme we're going to see throughout this story is power. The theme of power. And power doesn't always come from where you would expect it, right? Who really has power? Who really are the powerful? And power can be experienced on a small scale or a large scale. And the powerful can abuse that power. And the powerful can save. The powerful can be selfish and justifying of their behavior. And the powerful can be selfless and benefit the greater good. And can those who have been mistreated with power, like Joseph, can they use power graciously and constructively? Joseph's story also invites us to consider how we approach seemingly powerless situations. His story shows the small being elevated to power. And so maybe some of the things that you and I feel powerless over should be tempered with knowing that our God is not dependent upon power rules in this world. Power is a theme in this story. And you and I are invited to consider, what does it look like to trust God when we have power and when we lack power? At another level of the Joseph story, we deal with family and how does a person of God live in family? And that's really practical because we all live in families, right? And families can do some pretty crazy stuff. And we have some crazy stuff going on in our families. And when it comes to Joseph's family, I think, Dr. Phil could stay busy for a really long time with his family. His family is so bizarre. I mean, what he grows up in. Now, I'm going to recount a little bit about his family, and I want you to think about it from Joseph's perspective of what he's born into and what he grows up in. Jacob, his dad, he's been a deceiver and a sneak for a long time. He stole his older brother's blessing by snookering his aged and blind father with the help of his mom. He runs off, he escapes, leaves the area after he's done this, after he's snookered everybody, settles down in a far land with some distant family. And his subsequent marital details, I mean, it's like soap opera stuff. He falls in love with this man, Laban's daughter, Rachel. And he works 7 years for a bride price for Rachel. And the end of the 7 years comes, and there's this wedding. There's probably a lot of celebrating, a lot of drinking. There are people who wear veils in this culture. Jacob wakes up from his wedding night only to find not Rachel in his bed, but Leah, Rachel's sister. What gives, And then it's like, the reason is like, well, in our culture, it's not right for the younger to be married before the older. Like, oh, think you could have ran that by me? It's like. And so he's got to work another 7 years for Rachel. Now, they get married a week later, but he's committed to another 7 years of working for this guy. And then we get jealousy between the sister wives because one is loved more but cannot get pregnant, and one is loved less and gets pregnant all the time. And eventually the sister wives start bringing in their handmaids into the picture, and we've got sort of this baby arms race. So we got a lot of sons by various women, none of them named Rachel, the favorite wife. Finally, favorite wife, Rachel, gets pregnant. And who does she give birth to? Joseph. Jacob's father-in-law, Laban, he's not the most honest guy himself. And so Jacob is eventually happy to kind of skedaddle when God says to go back home. And he narrowly avoids an altercation with Laban because he just kind of disappears and ups, and, one of his wives steals some idols, and, it's crazy. But he's getting to leave. But at the same time, going home means what? He has to now face Esau, the brother that he stole something so precious to him from. And Joseph is a young boy when he sees all this happening. And on the way home, Jacob gets word that Esau is coming out to meet him with 400 men. Why? I mean, Joseph was probably wondering why. Why is he coming out here with 400 men? Well, it's possible that Uncle Esau is still mad and he's going to kill us all. Dad ripped him off in a really painful way. And so what does Jacob do when he hears these 400 people are coming to meet him with this brother that he has wronged? He doesn't do anything terribly courageous. He first sends a bunch of livestock as gifts because God's really blessed him. He's made him wealthy. And so he sends these livestock to hopefully, calm him down, buy him off, whatever. But what I think is telling in terms of family dynamics is what happens after the animals are sent. Because this is a large caravan of people that Jacob is moving, his family and all their flocks and everything. And what he ends up doing after the animals are sent is that he sends the handmaids and their sons further up the line. And then next in line is Leah and her sons and their livestock. And lastly, at the very back, where the most protection is Jacob, Rachel, and Joseph. Because if things go bad, things go down, let those guys take the heat while we try to get out of here as fast as possible. So if you're any other son than Joseph, you're seeing the pecking order here, aren't you? Joseph is treated better. Joseph's mom is treated better than our moms. Well, fortunately, everything works out. Uncle Esau is, calmed down. He's not there to create a ruckus. And what happens next in this family story is that Jacob and his clan set up camp at a place that comes later to be known as Shechem. And it's here that Joseph's older sister, Dinah, gets raped by some of the men of Shechem. And what does Jacob do in response to this? Nothing very courageous. But Dinah's older brothers find out about this, and they plot this scheme. And the men of Shechem return to meet with them. They say they want to marry. One of them wants to marry Dinah, and then they want to be able to marry some of these other daughters of this clan here. And the brothers say, you can't do that because you're not circumcised. You have to be circumcised if you want to marry our women. The men of Shechem agree. And after they are circumcised and they are still in pain and they are still incapacitated, Simeon and Levi, two of these older brothers, go in with their swords and just slaughter them. Set them up and kill them all. And what is Jacob concerned about? Their reputation. Are we going to be accepted now in this place? Just craziness going on. The next story we read about is Joseph losing some of these primary caregivers that he has. Deborah was a nanny kind of figure to him. Not long after that, his mom dies, giving birth to his little brother Benjamin. And so he and his brother are all that is left of Rachel, Jacob's favorite wife. And right after that, another crazy thing happens. Reuben, his oldest brother, ends up sleeping with one of the handmaids, which is really the mom of some of his brothers. And what does Jacob do? Not much. Dr. Phil could get some airtime, right? What a family. It's just full of family tensions and disrespect and dysfunction. There is growing tension between the older sons of Jacob and Jacob himself, the older sons of Jacob and Joseph. And Joseph's growing up in this house that's full of jealousy and strife and lust and immorality and anger and deceit and competition. And he's got a father who just seems like he's just not sure what to do. And how's Joseph going to turn out growing up in a family like that? Well, that kind of sets the stage for this series. Let me give you a couple of so whats to think about as we get ready to launch into this. And the first one is this. We've got to learn to diversify our questions to God. We've got to move beyond that exclusiveness of why questions when bad things happen. And we need to ask things like, what is God teaching me now? What is God accomplishing? And maybe most importantly, what do I do now? How do I bring honor to God now? If I've been wronged, if it's just some bizarre thing that's happened, nobody's fault, but it creates a lot of problems in my life, what do I do now? How do I honor God? Secondly, you can rise above your situations. Your family absolutely influences you. Your culture absolutely influences you. You can rise above that. The places and the times that you need to do that, you can do that. We'll see Joseph do that over and over. And given his family and given the surroundings he finds himself in, if he can do that, you and I can do that. God's Spirit in you can help you do that. And lastly, we have to remember all the way through this, it gets borne out over and over. God is working it all out. And it may not look like it in your life right now. I mean, got a bunch of different people in here. Got a bunch of different stuff going on in our lives. Come from a bunch of different families. They've done stinky things to us. There's been unfair things that happened in our neighborhoods and in our jobs, in our families, just up and down the line, right? Join the club, right? God is working it out. And he works it out best with people like Joseph, who are asking the question, okay, what do I do now? How am I going to look like God now? How am I going to live in a way that honors God now? And we have to ask ourselves that over and over. Man, if we get anything out of this series, but just maybe a habit where every day we are asking ourselves, okay, what do I do now? Then we're going to be a leg up from where we are. So let me pray. God, thank you for this story of Joseph. As we get ready to dig in deeper and deeper, help us to see just how much you can teach us through the way that he approached life, the way that he heard you. I know you are trying to lead us. I know you've given us your Spirit. You want us to stay in step with him. Help us to know how to do that. Help us to know what we need to do now, what we need to do next. Thank you for wanting to lead us. Make us good followers. And it's in your name, Jesus, that we pray. Amen. We're going to stand and sing. If we could pray for you about anything, absolutely would want to do that. Okay? Let's all sing.